Hello, everyone. Today we continue our journey into 103 days to save an empire, then silence. Thank you all so much for watching and listening to this video on HistoryTube. A young emperor, a dying empire. The year was 1898. A young emperor, barely in his 20s, stood amid a court of aging conservatives. He refused to follow the old path. He longed for change, sweeping, urgent, and complete. The nation needed saving. Something had to be done. Reform was the only way. And so he began, boldly, decisively, defying the deeply rooted traditions of the Qing dynasty. But after just 103 days, that dream crumbled. The reform was crushed without mercy. Some were imprisoned, others fled into exile, and some could never return. This isn't just a story from the past. It is the final whisper of a dying empire. The faint glimmer of hope, known as the 100 Days Reform, a brief, tragic moment of courage in the looming darkness of a fading era. After defeat, a nation searching for hope. 3 years before the reform, in 1895, China suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of Japan in the First Sino-Japanese War. Once the center of Asian civilization, the empire now stood humiliated. Taiwan was lost. Massive reparations were paid in silver. But worse than territory or treasure was the loss of dignity. Morale collapsed. The people were disillusioned. The Qing court, locked in tradition, seemed blind to the world changing around them. To many, the dynasty had become a symbol of decay, stagnant, outdated, and incapable of saving the nation. And yet in that darkness, sparks began to flicker. A new generation of intellectuals, hearts burning with patriotism, began to rise. Among them stood two powerful voices, Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao. They looked to Japan, once a fellow Asian nation, now a modern power reborn through bold reform. And they began to ask the hard questions. If Japan could do it, why can't we? We can't cling to the past forever. If we don't reform, our nation will perish. It was then that the dream of transformation began to take shape. The emperor who dared to dream. He ascended the throne as a child, and from the very beginning, his life was lived in the shadow of one of the most powerful women in Chinese history, Empress Dowager Cixi. Nearly every decision was made by her hand. Guangxu was emperor in name, but a figurehead in truth. But time passed. The boy grew up and began to see clearly. He saw the empire crumbling. He saw a court lost in ritual and blind to reality. And slowly he began to listen. He absorbed ideas from the West. He engaged with the reformist thinking of progressive scholars. And then he met Kang Youwei. That meeting changed everything. From a passive ruler, Guangxu became a man of conviction. No longer content to watch from the sidelines, he began to act. No longer afraid of change, he embraced it. And he did what few monarchs would dare to do. He staked his entire throne on the gamble of reform. Emperor Guangxu was not the weak man many believed him to be. When he saw the nation in decline, he did not stay silent. He rose, knowing full well the storm that lay ahead. 103 Days of Hope, the reform that shook the court. June 1898. A summer unlike any other began. For just 103 days, the Qing dynasty trembled under the weight of bold, sweeping reform, the likes of which China had never seen before. Emperor Guangxu signed 40 reform edicts in quick succession, each one a hammer blow against centuries of stagnation. Outdated civil service exams, once focused solely on memorizing Confucian classics, were abolished. A modern economic university was established. The military began training under Western models. Industrialization was encouraged, and for the first time in imperial history, freedom of the press was promoted. New academies opened their doors. Students studied science, mathematics, and technology, no longer limited to ancient texts. New ideas rushed in like fresh air through a stifling room. A generation of young intellectuals dared to dream of a reformed China, strong, enlightened, and standing shoulder to shoulder with the modern world. But just as the light began to rise, a shadow drew near. The further the reforms reached, the closer the old powers crept. A storm was gathering just beyond the gates of the Forbidden City, and those who believed in change had no idea how little time they had left. The Empress returns, power versus progress. But there was one person who never slept through the storm, Empress Dowager Cixi. She saw her power slipping away, and she would not let it go. Quietly, she rallied the conservative generals, men who feared reform just as much as she did. In the shadows, an old alliance was reborn. And then, on September 21st, 1898, after just over 3 months of reform, Emperor Guangxu was seized. He was imprisoned in Yingtai Pavilion, a lonely palace surrounded by water. The dream collapsed overnight. Kang Youwei fled to Japan. Liang Qichao escaped to Hong Kong. But 6 reformist scholars, young, brilliant, and full of idealism, were captured and executed. They became known as the 6 Gentlemen of Reform. The reform hadn't yet begun to blossom before it was ripped out by the roots. A steel hand from the inner court overturned everything. The 100 Days reform was over, as swiftly as it had begun. And once again, China sank back into the shadows, ruled by fear, tradition, and the refusal to change. Seeds of revolution, shadows of regret. The 100 Days reform ended in failure. But not everything was lost. What began in those short 103 days managed to plant a seed of new thinking, of courage to change, of a vision for a China beyond decay. The reformist ideals of Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao did not die. They lived on in the hearts of a new generation of young intellectuals, those who would later become the spark that ignited the Xinhai Revolution of 1911. A revolution that would topple the Qing dynasty and end over 2,000 years of imperial rule. As for Emperor Guangxu, he lived for a few more years, isolated and powerless. According to many sources, he was poisoned just one day before Empress Dowager Cixi passed away. And yet, no matter how tragic the ending, the spirit of reform, the desire for change, never truly died. It smoldered quietly, like embers beneath the ashes. And just over a decade later, it would roar to life and burn down an empire. History remembers those who tried. Reform, sometimes it takes more than just a brave emperor. Guangxu dared to step forward, while the entire court stood still. He did not win, but he awakened a generation. His courage was not forgotten. It became memory, it became inspiration, and it became a vital part of China's long road to renewal. History doesn't always remember those who succeeded, but those who dared to begin. The 100 Days reform came to an end. But the story of those who carried that dream forward is just beginning. Who were they? What did they do next? And what truly brought down the Qing Empire just over a decade later? We'll see you in the next chapter. Thank you for following today's story with HistoryTube. See you in the next videos, where together we'll keep the flame of history burning.